أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and Jummah Mubarak. Inshallah, we will continue our discussion on Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya, Islamic education or Islamic upbringing, particularly focusing on that third period in which the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, they speak about in the hadith that we have read. That hadith from the Prophet is al-waladu sayyidun sab'a sinin وعبد 7 سنين ووزير 7 سنين فإن رضيت خلائكه ل21 سنة وإلا ضرب على جنبيه فقد أعذرت إلى الله. So the Prophet of Allah, he states in his hadith that the child is the Sayyid or master of the house for 7 years, Abdun Sabah, the servant of the house for 7 years, and then the ambassador for the house for the 7 years. That last period, the child is the ambassador. And at that point, the child should be roughly about 21 years old, as the Prophet states. He says, and if you are content with their akhlaq, their manners, then this is what is ideal. Otherwise, then you place that aside, that worry aside, for you have been excused before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Granted that the parents have done their role and fulfilled their role and responsibility in bringing that child up. And that's what the hadith of Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam pretty much focuses on, whereas the Prophet's hadith focuses on the perspective of the child, that the child is gets free for some time, don't really have much responsibilities in that first period of tarbiyah, and then they begin to adopt responsibilities with regards to their ibadah, with regards to those things that their parents are commanding them to do. And then the last period, that third period where they are the wazir, they should continue their education, continue their training, but at that point they are representing that household, representing that tarbiyah that the parents have given them. Of course, if they have taken on those manners, they have learned the lesson that they were supposed to learn. From the perspective of Imam Sadiq, his hadith is احمل سبيك حتى يأتي عليه 6 سنين ثم أدبه في الكتاب 6 سنين ثم ضمه إليك 7 سنين فأدبه بأدبك فإن قبل صلح وإلا فخل عنه. So Imam Sadiq, he speaks more or less from the perspective of the parent and their responsibility and their duty. So he says, carry your child or cherish your child for the 6 years. That's the period when they're the sayyid. You cherish them, you carry them. Of course, your tarbiyah of them is in a more indirect form. So that is for 6 years or 7 years if you base the calculation on the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That second period, Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, and then you train them and cultivate them in the Quran. You teach them the Quran. That's the period in which they are the abd, that they are beginning to learn some responsibility. And then that last period in which they are the wazir, they are representing that household, they are the ambassador of that household, the secretary of that household. Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, he says, ثُمَّ ضُمَّهُ إِلَيْكَ, then you carry them with you, you be their companion, you are giving them your experience. So you do this for 7 years according to Imam Sadiq. He says, فَأَدِّبْهُ بِأَدَبِكَ, We explained in our last lecture on Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya that one of the meanings of this, that you give your children your adab, not necessarily that they have to do exactly the same thing that you did, because as Imam Ali alayhi he stated that train your children for their time. And so how do we train our children for their time? By giving them our adab, we give them the wisdom of our adab. We give them that hikmah. As Imam Sadiq alayhi he also explained, and we mentioned this last week, and just as a reminder, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He cultivated or He educated or He trained His Prophet, He trained Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Imam Sadiq said that the Prophet i'tadaba fafawwad Allahu ilayh. So the Prophet of Allah adopted and embodied that education and training. The example of that Imam Sadiq alayhi gave is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Mecca a sacred place, made it a place of safety. And so likewise, with the Prophet embodying that teaching and education from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the Prophet of Allah, he made Medina a sacred place. So this is just an example of how the Prophet embodied that education, the wisdom of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching him. And likewise, at that third stage of tarbiyah, when we are training our children, this is what we should be focusing on, giving them the wisdom and the hikmah of our experience, what we have lived, what we have seen, how we have tried to implement the Quran and also the ruwayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim in our life. And among those ruwayat that we have from the Ahlul Bayt, as we are very fortunate that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim from the Prophet to all of our Imma alayhim, they would often recite or quote to people the wisdom of Luqman alayhi salam. And Luqman, who according to some scholars is among the prophets, he's Nabi Luqman. Others say that he is not Nabi, but rather he was Al-Hakim, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةِ. So Luqman was Hakim, but not Nabi, according to some. In either case, we can use his playbook, because Luqman, the Hakim, the one who is wise, he would often transfer this wisdom to his son, Ya Bunay. And those very things that we aim as well. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in Surah Al-Luqman, verse 13, where Luqman, he tells his son, Ya Bunay, la tushrik billah. That, oh my son, do not hold any partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Luqman is aiming to teach his child Tawheed, teach his son Tawheed, just like we are. And as well, Luqman, he's concerned about the well-being of his child and the relationship that his child has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He tells him that, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything and will take account for every action. So he tells his son, Ya Bunay, aqim as-salah, wa'amur bil-ma'ruf, wanha 'anil munkar, wasbir ala ma asabak. So he tells his son, oh my son, establish the prayer, do amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar, enjoying the good and forbid the wrong, and be patient on those things, or in face of those things which will be difficult for you, those difficult moments in life. And it is those difficult moments in life that if our children have gained that wisdom, that hikmah, then all of those difficulties that they will face in life, they will be able to surmount those difficulties. They will be able to pass those tests. So what are those wisdoms, those words of wisdom that Luqman, he gave to his son, that we ourselves can, one, learn and implement those in our own lives? Because even after that point of being 21 or passing that third phase of tarbiyah, that if we've gone past that, or if we have children who are at that phase and we're training them, that these words of wisdom of Luqman are beneficial for both groups. And as I said in the very beginning, that after we speak about the Tarbiyah in these three phases, we'll talk about the Tarbiyah for beyond that stage. The words of wisdom of Luqman, the ethos and ethics of Luqman are those things that we can use even beyond the point of that third phase of Tarbiyah. And this is why Luqman, he tells his son, he says, Ya bunay, in adabta saghiran intafa'ta bihi kabira. In one of the riwayat, the Luqman al-Hakim, he says to his son, he says, oh my son, he says that if you have gained this tarbiyah, or this training that I'm giving you at a young age, he says, then it will benefit you even when you are older. Among these wisdom, the words of wisdom that Luqman, he gives his son, if we categorize some of them, and we'll speak about some of them as well, in these categories. So he teaches his son to value knowledge, the wisdom of knowledge itself and learning itself. Then he teaches him the wisdom about building the self, about refining oneself. And then the afat bana an-nafs, teaches what are these, you could say, the pitfalls of self-development. Where are the things that a person must be kind of aware of and be weary of when they are self-building, when they are trying to refine their nafs. Then Luqman also, he gives his son different words of wisdom with regards to ethics, akhlaq, and personal ethics, and then also ethics with regards to interacting with society, so social ethics. Teaches his son how to be sociable. So adab la-akhlaqiyya and adab al-ijtima'iyya. These are the types of wisdom that Luqman, he gives. With regards to knowledge itself, Luqman, he tells his son, he says, Ya bunay, i'lam anna ghayata su'dada wa sharafi fi dunya wal akhirah husnul aql. Wa anna al-abda idha hasuna aqluhu ghatta dhalika uyubahu wa aslaha musawiyah. So Luqman, he tells his son, he says that, oh my son, know that that the peak of, you say, of nobility and honor in this world and the hereafter is husnul aql. So good reasoning. So for a person to have, to be able to reason very well. And husnul aql here is not just knowledge. It's not simply a person reading a book and gaining book knowledge, so they have a lot of knowledge. No, what Luqman, he's talking about is reasoning, to be someone who is understanding. He says, because having that husnul aql, he says, any servant, any abd, any servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in fact any servant, no matter what state they're in, he says that if they have good reasoning, husnul aql, he says this will cover over their shortcomings, or yubahu, and it will also set them in the right direction. Wa aslaha masawi'ah, and so this will also correct that person's path. And what Luqman, he means by this this aql, husnul aql, and he explains in other ayat, and we're just consolidating them here. He tells his son, Ya bunay, i'qil anillah. So to have good reasoning, a person has to factor in the divine, factor in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within their process of reasoning. For example, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do something, or any action that we are planning to do, what we need to factor in is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would want from us there. So if we don't factor that in, then of course we will probably be following our own nafs, our own whim, rather than following that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do, that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has approved for us to do, or that which we understand is correct through the teachings of Muhammad wa ala Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. So when we use our reasoning and employ our reasoning, then we have to factor in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Luqman, he also tells his son with regards to those individuals who have displayed husn al-aql, those people who display good reasoning and they are considered aqil. He says that the person who is aqil, he says, يكون في أهله كالصبي وإذا كان في القوم وجد رجلا. And this is a very interesting perspective or characteristic about that person who has good reasoning. So he says that person who has good reasoning, he says that you will find him among his family kasabi, like a young boy. But when he's out in the society, you'll find him as a man. What we understand from this is that it does not, that person who's aqil, or that person, at least the man who's aqil, that if he's in his home, if he's yelling and he's fighting everyone, why? Because his word has to be the last word, or he has to be the one who's ruling. This is not the actions of someone who is aqil, according to Luqman al-Hakim. But no, the person who is in his home, he is understanding. Kasabi. He's understanding, he's working, he's flexible, because usually children are flexible. They try to work together. So this is the person who's aqil in his home and outside his home, but the person is clear, has clear direction, he's firm. Not that he's inflexible, but he has a clear direction in his path, or the sisters as well. And so this can go both ways, because this is a wisdom, that they are like sabiyya in the home, that they are like the children in the home, but imra'a in the society. She's a woman, very direct and firm person in society. Likewise, Luqman, he speaks about the traits of the person who has husn al-aql, who has good rationality, and perhaps this is one of those things that they do in order to maintain their rationality, to maintain their state of reasoning, of good reasoning, husn al-aql. He says that the person who's aql, يخلي نفسه من أربعة أوقات. So they also divide their time into 4 times. We've spoken about this before, but just as a reminder, that person who has husn al-aql, who's a reasonable person, a rational person, that person who has gained the wisdom of Tarbiyah al-Islamiyya, Islamic upbringing, so they will divide their time in one part for worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one part for gaining work, gainful employment, working, gaining their livelihood, a third part for, we could say, checking their selves, checking their nafs, doing muhasibah, taking account of their selves and their actions to ensure that their actions are in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. And the fourth part of their time that they're dividing their time into is to have fun, which is halal. And that fourth part, according to Luqman, he says, and this is important in order to support all of the other times, your times of worship, your times of work, and your time of muhasibah, of taking account of oneself. And this is a question that sometimes, I get from parents. They think that, oh, well, my children, they're playing games and they're playing too much games, or they're doing this, or they're playing this type of game. What needs to be understood is that, yes, playing those games or even watching a movie, it is fine. Of course, the contents of those must be halal and be permissible. But those things, those relaxing times, those free times, those moments in which a person has to, you could say, de-stress and to relax. According to Luqman al-Hakim, he says this is very important to have. We've also find it in the Rawayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam, where they also recommend the same thing, that to have those moments, those downtimes, it will help in your ibadah, your concentration in ibadah. Not necessarily, that downtown doesn't necessarily have to be to watch a movie or to play a game, but whatever relaxes you, that moment in which you have relaxation, So that helps in your ibadah, your concentration in ibadah. That helps in your work. That helps with doing muhasabah, to taking account of yourself. Helps with all of those things. The last advice of Luqman Hakim that I want to give, also within this context of having husn al-aql and developing that husn al-aql as that good, or you could say good reasoning, or being a rational person, which is an important part of the Tarbiyah al-Islamiyah, especially in this third phase of Tarbiyah and beyond. So Luqman, he says, Ya bunay ij'al fi ayyamika wa layalika wa sa'atika nasiban laka fi talab al-ilm. It's very important. So he tells his son, my son, he says, carve out in your days, or in your nights, or in your hours of the day, or hours of the night, he says, nasiban laka fi talab al-ilm, a proportion of that time throughout the day, throughout the night, or throughout your hours, in order to seek knowledge, in order to learn something. That, if we have received tarbiyah indirectly in that first stage, where Imam Sadiq, he says, you cherish your child, you carry them. If we've received the tarbiyah in that second phase, that we are, the child is al-abd, and the parent is training the child fi kitabillah, which is usually the age of the children who are in madrasa. And then after madrasa, we get some wisdom, or sometimes some encouragement from our parents here and there. But if we do not continue that education and self-education there afterwards, then we will not develop that husn al-aql, or our ability to reason will begin to diminish, or will stay stagnant. So this is why Luqman, he says, it's very important. He's telling his son to carve out time to learn. And each of us, we need to do this, again, if we are beyond that age of 21, in order to maintain our Tarbiyat al-Islami, in order to maintain our ethics training, or our development beyond that age of 21, we need to make a specific time to learn something, to pick up a book, to read the rulings of our maraji, so that I know that what actions I'm doing, are they in line with what I should be doing or not. To refresh our understanding of the aqaid, the tawheed, nabuwat, ma'ad, imama, al-adl ilahi. So we have to refresh our memory of these things about theology, our belief, about our actions, about the akhlaq, about the words of Ahlul Bayt, about the Quran, especially the Quran, reading the Quran. Pick up a book to read, learn something every day, as Luqman, he's advising his son, or every night, or every hour. Something we have to learn, and we should not go without learning anything, even if it is we carve out 5 minutes of our time just to read one thing, a few verses of Quran, some hadith, a Islamic ruling. But this will help us to gain that husn al-aql and understand and appreciate the value of knowledge, as Luqman, he is teaching his son. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He continues to allow us to learn from the wisdom of the Quran, and more importantly, to embody that wisdom of the Quran and embody the wisdom of the hadith of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins, to cover our shortcomings, to grant us our needs, to cure those who are ill among our friends and family members, and to have mercy upon our deceased ones. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of Imam Zaman, and make us among his helpers, his companions, and those who sacrifice our lives for him. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا واقضي حوائجنا واشف مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان، واجعلنا من أعوانه وانصاره والمستشارين بين يديه وتحت لوائه بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.